Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Maryam Henein. I am an investigative journalist, a functional medicine consultant, best known for directing the film Vanishing of the Bees. And I'm here today with Rick Hanson, who is a former elections professional and, dare I say it, Democrat. And just wanting to have a casual conversation. I think that we have similar stories, so I'm interested in hearing Rick. And I approached you because I'm working on my third part of a series for Activist Post, and I really wanted to speak with a Democrat, a reasonable one, and get a sense. I read one of your threads on Twitter, so, Rick, welcome. And maybe you can share a little bit about your story and how it's similar to mine politically.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for the invitation to be here. We were talking before we started, and you were sharing your story, and I was observing how similar it is to my own in the sense that, I would say I've been a Warren Democrat since 2016, and just really didn't pay that much attention to the president. Never hated him, but I wasn't really that. I was a Democrat and had been worked in Democratic politics. So I've been a Democrat for 30 years. I've run statewide campaigns for Democrats. And so when COVID hit, I started scratching my head, said, there's something wrong with this picture. And I think similar to you, started listening to the president directly and saw there was a disconnect between what I was hearing from the president and what I was hearing in mainstream media. And importantly, what wasn't being covered in mainstream media or that was being distorted by mainstream media. And the long and the short of it is that I guess I still am a registered Democrat. Uh, Most of my friends in real life are registered Democrats, but I guess I would characterize myself as a Trump Republican. I mean, a Trump Democrat now. And
I like that.
as a we remember the old Reagan Democrats. Well, I'm probably a Trump Democrat, and I think what I have as a former political professional. One of the things that impresses me about him is that he plays a buffoon on television, but he's probably one of the best political strategists I've ever seen in my life. And I'm really, really impressed by his strategic thinking and his political savvy. And so I've become a supporter of the president. But like I said, I never suffered from Trump derangement syndrome, and I'm not a Trump walks on water guy. I think people put way too much emotion into these decisions.
Mm,
These are
mm.
like you're hiring a professional to do a particular job, and you're going to hire them, and then you're going to entrust them to do the job, and not check our critical thinking, but should be supportive as we go. So that's kind of my story.
So, how long have you been a Trump Democrat, would you say?
Oh, probably since about June. Yeah, May or
Okay.
June.
And when you say you were a former election professional, what does that mean?
So elections in this country are administered at the local level. So typically a county, although there might be some other jurisdictions like a township or something like that. There's over 3,000 of those in the United States. But they are regulated in every state by a chief state elections officer, who's typically holds the office of Secretary of State. And so I worked right out of university. I went to work in the state elections division for the state of Oregon, and
Okay.
also then ended up by the time I left that the elections division was part of the Secretary of State's office. By the time I left, 7 years later, I was the chief of staff working directly with the Secretary of State.
Okay. Okay. And so one thing in my investigation that's become clear, and I guess now in retrospect it's not a surprise, this election effery or manipulating votes or whatever is not new. I mean, Lou Dobbs, for instance, interviewed Sidney Powell last week, and or he's interviewed her several times, but then I found when he was working for CNN 2006 a segment that he did on Smartmatic and Dominion. And if I, as a journalist, there's no way I wouldn't be like, oh, by the way, I covered this story. but you forgot to tell us that, Lou. So, and then I found clips and archival footage talking about election fraud. There's a bit I found from Pelosi talking, crapping on Trump, wanting to investigate election fraud back then, and she gaslights him. So this isn't new. What's different now? I guess I'm asking rhetorically, but is that
Well,
was it new to you learning about Dominion and Smartmatic as a professional in the
yeah.
elections?
So I was when there was a big push after the 2000 election, Bush v. Gore, to establish some federal controls over elections because people were using, I don't know if you remember, but the big issue in the Florida election was what were called hanging chads. So when you have a punch card ballot, which was very common, because again, you got more than 3,000 jurisdictions, and many of them were using very old technology that was a punch card, which was
Mm,
the original computers back in the 50s were punch cards. So it was very old technology, and it caused a lot of confusion. So the federal government decided they wanted to up level, in theory, up level the voting systems, and they established this Elections Assistance Commission and put in some national standards for what they wanted in terms of elections. And as somebody who had been observing elections, this was even before I became a CIO, which is another bit of relevant experience. That I was surprised, and when I would talk to my colleagues here in Oregon, we're surprised, why is there this rush to go very high tech?
mm,
Because you don't have uh, necessarily the technical ability in these elections offices to manage that. And I would note Senator Wyden, the senior senator from Oregon, who's a Democrat, wrote a letter, I think it was to the federal government, in the last year or two, where he said essentially that. So that's a bipartisan awareness. And
mm-hmm,
as somebody who was a CIO and has done IT consulting, my first question whenever I'm dealing with a new client is, what's your level of expertise to manage the software that you want me to buy for you? Because you want to make sure you don't overbuy what you can afford. I mean, what you can manage on your own. And
mm-hmm,
that's clearly what's
mm-hmm.
happened in this case. And so I scratched my head, why are we doing this? And in hindsight, I have to wonder if it wasn't, whether inadvertent, we think it might be inadvertent, but what if it was intentional? It's a legitimate question to ask,
Right.
intentional plan. And we might not ever know, but it's not a partisan issue, as you've noted, because Democrats have complained about it before. And
Yes. Sorry,
so
just to say to who's listening that in was it 2005, Jimmy Carter did a report that I reference in my first piece, exactly that and voter integrity should matter no matter what, as I say, no matter what style that you're socially distanced in, right?
yeah,
Uh,
and what I would observe about that is that this, we're getting a lot of negative attention toward these elections officials in a handful of counties. There's more than 3,000 local jurisdictions. By and large, these are apple pie and Americana people who take very seriously the trust that we placed in them. But something's happened and gone awry in these particular places where there's been some incentive to cheat. It goes beyond incompetence, I think, at this point.
yeah, so in maybe share with us what are your findings or observations with this election, having also looked at the two lawsuits by Sidney Powell's
Mhm.
lawsuits in Michigan and Georgia. I'm almost finished the Michigan one, so I'm not, but I've been looking at all. There's so many variations. It's
Yeah.
just, to go to the extent, if you're going to tell me this is the safest election in US history, I've said it, that's a red flag. At this point, that's a red flag. Unless you're living underneath a rock, this is not an opinion. There's patterns in different swing states where the lawsuits have been filed by Trump and others So can you take us a little bit through your process of, I don't know if you also went to bed thinking, oh, okay, well, Trump's gonna win, and then wake up and boom, something else is, now Joey is winning.
Yeah, before I talk about the cases, I
Yeah,
want to go back to
yeah.
something you remarked, which is the level of fraud, and I don't know what the current number is, but 20 years ago, um, it was common at any federal election for the Department of Justice to send observers out, and in the mid to late 90s, the number was 3,000 observers got sent to observe elections in the United States. So fraud has gone on, we know, in every election for a very long time, sometimes more obvious than in others, and often unreported. And
Mm.
ironically, one of the benefits of this move toward high tech is that it's now more obvious. And I think how we saw the vote counts change, the statistical work that people are doing, where they can show through statistics and mathematical probability how unrealistic some of these results are, that probably wouldn't have been possible. There's a silver lining to this situation we're in is that it is making it easier for us to see and detect and prove the fraud as it relates to these ballot counting machines. So just as from a philosophical perspective, there's kind of that philosophical perspective, there's different ways of phrasing it, but we can never really know the big picture. So in a way, this breakdown is going to lead us to a breakthrough ultimately, and probably to
That's
a
say
level of.
that's sorry, that sounds like a landmark, a phrase. I don't know if you're familiar with landmark.
I don't know. I picked it up from some organizational development consultants I used to work with. So
Mm.
maybe it is a landmark phrase, but it holds true. That we can't really know the big picture. So this seemingly negative event is going to lead us to a better place.
I want to hear kind of like your play by play of, like, I'm assuming you watched the elections and then woke up, and then, like, take me through. And also, why are people interview you for what are you why are on the elections, are you doing a lot of interviews as a Democrat, or?
Okay, so you want to start with play by play? Okay, so
Sure.
I've been a political junkie probably since I was 2 years old. When I disappeared at a family reunion, and my parents found me in the bar watching whatever Democratic or Republican National Convention on TV as a 2-year-old.
Oh
So
my
I've
God.
always I've always been into it. But at some point, after you've worked in politics, you can almost assess what's going to happen without really having to pay that much attention. And so I didn't sit up and watch the election returns at all. And so it was
Okay.
all news to me when I got up the next day. And I have a belief that Trump is going to serve a second term. I don't know the exact pathway to get there, but I have believed that. I went to bed believing that. So, so I've got a pretty good sensibility that way. So, I know some people are wavering. They think things are looking negative, and to me, I think everything's happening perfectly, and have 100% confidence. So I've just kind of been more or less just watching it play out in the background. I'm not doing day by day checking on things that are going on, other than every now and then watching the president, or because it's somewhat entertaining. I find it comical
Yeah,
at times.
to
It's like
say
I
the
can't believe this is
least.
happening. So it makes me
Right.
laugh. And but what happened is that after we got to the point of filing lawsuits, I thought, okay, when you're submitting a filing to a court, there's a higher standard of credibility that's expected than just saying something on Twitter or saying something on a news conference. And having read a lot of filings over my career, and being locked in by our governor on Thanksgiving Day, I pulled up the filing as soon as I could, and I spent Thanksgiving morning reading it.
Mm.
And because I wanted to really understand it. And one of the things I've observed is that there, you know, there's more than 3,000 local jurisdictions, 50 states, plus American territories. So there's more than 3,000 people who have elections expertise, who could potentially be commenting on this, and nobody is.
Mm.
You know, you're seeing the same silence as you're seeing from the Republicans in Congress. You know, when they had that million-person march in Washington, D.C., and the only elected official, the only elected Republican who came out and talked to them was the president. Nobody
Yeah.
else. And
Yeah.
we're seeing the same thing here. So I thought, you know, lawyers write filings for other lawyers, and most people don't have experience reading them or understanding them or being able to decipher them. And there's so much drama and color and story about what happened. You know, 1,000 ballots here, USB drive there, vans driving at 4 in the morning. And I think what's helpful for people, because a lot of people are drive-by media consumers. So what's helpful for people is if you can give them a coherent narrative to put things in context so that the
Yes.
average person can understand it. And that was really my objective. I stepped forward to do this because I didn't feel like anybody else was doing it. And I felt like I had the experience to offer some insight into those structural problems. And that's the Twitter thread that I did has met with that. It's been exactly the reaction. Many, many comments saying, thank you for explaining this to me in a way a 4-year-old could understand. I understand now the basics so that when I hear the details, I get why they matter. And that was really my
So
objective.
can we go over? I will be citing you for my piece on Michigan,
Uh-huh.
and so if we can focus on Michigan, obviously
Sure.
there. Well, it's not obvious, but there are similar patterns of effery throughout the country. But I'm going to focus on Michigan. So maybe you can speak about those structural. So you're a Democrat. Are you registered a Democrat? You said.
I'm still
So how
registered
does that work?
Democrat, but I think, you know, I think that there's no point in changing one's registration because the fallout of the Trump presidency is going to be a complete realignment of our politics. And I don't think that anybody who's a traditional Republican or traditional Democrat right now is necessarily going to still be that a year from now. So I'm just holding tight as a Trump Democrat.
Okay. So yeah, let's take me through with the focus on Michigan. Let's say I'm a 4-year-old, to explain, oh, there's so many variations of effery.
Right. And, you know, it's hard sometimes to compare lawsuit to lawsuit as well because you've likely got different lawyers writing them. Um, but the issues are similar so far that we're
Yeah,
seeing.
I would say with Sidney Powell's that it was probably a boilerplate. There's some similarities. You know, she got a lot of slack or critique for I don't think that they were. I think it's a formatting issue that all the words were mushed
Oh,
together.
Michigan, yeah.
That it was like a copy and paste issue where something happened with the formatting,
Yeah.
to go as far as to say that it's like did it on purpose to catch the reporters. I think is a little bit of a stretch to say that. So okay, you read the filing. What are your takeaways? Can we go over it or like yeah.
Yeah, sure. And you know, the types of formatting errors you're talking about, just as a side note, are very
Yeah.
common in filings.
Yeah.
You know, they're just very common. Lawyers are getting their ideas, not really trying to dot the I and put the comma in the right place. And so it just betrays a lack of familiarity with the process by people who are making those complaints. But I think that in both cases, and I'm guessing this template would apply to the cases that have yet to be filed, I would put the issues raised in 3 categories. And the first one is the technology, the hardware and the software that's been in use. Okay. The second area are the systemic issues, the elections administration structure. Okay, because there's a structure to elections administration regardless of whether you have technology involved or not. In recent years, there's more technology, but those technologies are simply stepping in place of a manual process, right? So the process is still the same. And then the third area of issues are what I would call just plain outright fraud that have nothing to do with systems or tech. So, let's just start with the fraud for a moment, because that again would be the stuff you'd see in 1960 in Chicago, where ballots are being stuffed into ballot boxes. Ballots are being altered. The voter files, which was an interesting one, I thought, in the Michigan case in particular, where the filing alleges that elections workers were going into the voter file to find voters to whom they could attach a ballot, basically claim that person voted, and then they could put the ballot into the ballot stream.
Is that, sorry, Rick, is that different than there was one I they talked about they would be picking through the envelopes and kind of peering inside and assuming, oh, this is a Trump, let's take it out and put it in the other, and take it out of the secrecy envelope and put it in another envelope, therefore making it a problematic ballot. Is that what you're talking about?
That's a separate issue.
Okay.
That's yet
Yet
another.
another. Okay.
I mean, I identified just in the Michigan filing, I think I had 8 or 9 points here,
Yeah.
which was just shocking to me. Stuff that's not necessarily prescribed in state law, because it's so absurd to be doing this. So you're taking a ballot and altering it in some way. So that might be you're changing the vote on the ballot. What you're talking about is actually taking a ballot and assigning it to somebody else, which, given that these are paper ballots, I don't know how you do that. I can see how you might be able to do it electronically. So I'm not sure the exact means by which that was done.
Well, the one what I'm talking about is if you're taking out of the secrecy envelope and putting it in another envelope, then it fails the protocol for a legitimate ballot, and then it kind of discounts it, and then taking the ones that are Biden and making sure those go through. That was my understanding.
Well, it's not entirely clear to me
Okay.
exactly what they were doing.
Okay.
If they were taking it, because in theory, if they were introducing new ballots into the ballot stream, like happened in Pennsylvania, for example, there's 700,000 more ballots were received than were sent out. Okay, so those 700,000 ballots, they're just putting in the stream. They're not attached to a voter, right? And what you're talking about is taking let's say, for example, taking the envelope, looking at it, and saying, "Oh, this is a Trump voter. I'm going to assign that to Biden." I don't understand how you would do that, because the counting software would recognize it as a Trump voter. So you'd have to manipulate within the system, unless they're taking it out of the envelope and they're saying it's spoiled somehow and therefore not counting it. The means by which you would take a ballot that's got the bubble filled in for Trump and count that for Biden, I don't know how you do that unless it was done inside the system through a software. So,
Okay.
but what they were doing, so in Pennsylvania, they took these 700,000 extra ballots and they just put them into the system. In Michigan, what they're alleging is that they took that same ballot, but they, instead of just putting it into the system, they looked inside the voter registration database and found people who had not voted and marked them as having voted, so they could attribute that ballot to that person. Okay, so it's an extra layer of sort of security that you're not going to get caught, I suppose. They were accepting ballots after 8 o'clock, and also and then but not just accepting them after 8 o'clock, they were stamping them as having been received before 8 o'clock. Okay. They were changing votes, is what you're talking about. And again, I don't know how you do that outside the system. They were Sidney talks about changing undervotes and overvotes. And while I understand what an undervote and an overvote is, I don't know how it applies in this particular situation. I can't really speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
This one really shocked me. They were counting ballots that were not eligible to be counted. So whether they're counterfeit or spoiled or whatever, I don't know. And they were doing so repeatedly. So they were
Yeah.
running the same ballot through the system again and again and again and again. I mean, it's just a level of, as you said, effery that is like it's so blatant. And then, as I already said, the electronic manipulation of vote. That's just what I would say. Those are all, I put them under the general category of what I would call old-fashioned ballot box stuffing through 9 different methods. Um, okay, so there's those. Do you want to talk any more about fraud before I move on to the systemic, the structural problems?
Well, what comes to mind, and maybe it's not appropriate to ask now, but is how on earth did they think that they would get away with this? How did they think they would get away with this? Now, with that said, I've thought many times in regards to the coronavirus, like surely now, with the 6% now, maybe now that pandemic came out, like surely now, but keep on doubling down with their lies. But these people are arguably breaking the law, and
Oh, it's
so
inarguable.
sorry,
It's inarguable. I'm
it is
presuming any of these
inarguable.
allegations are true. They're inarguably breaking the law.
Yes, right. So what have you thought, did that cross your mind? Like how did they think they would get away with this? Maybe they didn't want to get away with this? I don't know.
You know, it's funny because some people are saying it's almost like they wanted to be caught. A number of
Right.
people said that, and that's a definite possibility. You know, a lot of people are saying we're watching a movie and this has all been gamed out in advance. You know, and that's
I
definitely possible. Definitely
Yeah.
possible.
We're in a reality show at this point, I
Yeah.
feel. It's and so I have to keep in mind that this is all maybe political theater, and certainly the president alluded to this on a regular basis during his the rallies. And for one, two, like was covering George Floyd, and they at one point Hennepin County trying to get rid of Andrew Baker, who's ostensibly the real independent examiner, saying that he caused, quote, irreparable damage to the Black community with his exhaustive, detailed, real autopsy report, because Michael Baden didn't bother to run a tox. But anyway, after the meeting, this is May, or sorry, it's June, they're asking for $3.5 million out of the CARES Act, and there's one commissioner that says, this is bipartisan, the potential fraud. But it's like, we knew this is less fatal than the flu, but yet here in May, you're already projecting in November that this is still going to be an issue, and we absolutely need mail-in ballot, which is again a red flag. So given that this is not like I mean, I'm surprised at the level, but this was anticipated. So maybe they did want to get caught, which I don't know what the point of that is.
Well, you know, I think of, you know, there's that often sort of that popular idea that a lot of criminals are just stupid, and that could very well be. And they've been doing this. That's the thing. This type of fraud has gone on probably under our noses for a long time in a lot of
Right.
these places. It's just that they were expecting to lose like this, and that forced them to do a lot of really stupid things, you know. And in the heat of the moment, they probably weren't thinking. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to get inside of a criminal's brain for sure.
But when you say criminal, I mean, there's so many people who are accomplices that maybe just have this overwhelming hatred for Orange Man. So I don't know who the criminals are. And someone had brought up, I think it was Dr. Corsi, that in a court of law, Sidney Powell's filings are not going to hold water because you're going to want to know exactly who it is that committed the fraud. And there's so many people involved. So yeah,
Well, I don't know if he is an attorney. I know there have been some attorneys commenting on my Twitter thread, and they're not in agreement about what the remedy is. And so I wouldn't begin to hazard a guess at what the possible remedy would be or what the possible next steps would be around this. But clearly, we have to presume that at some point the Justice Department has got to be investigating it because
right?
it's
You'd
fraudulent.
think so, but we've asked, where's the DOJ? Before you get into the systematic issues, um, I had mentioned to you, I think in DM on Twitter, were you aware of all the lawsuits? There's hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits, Rick, that were filed in regards to the disruptions in the electoral process because of the coronavirus. So
Mm.
then you get, it's like, oh, you have to be 6 feet distance, but you can't see shit. You can't. How can you observe if you can't see? So hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits, and that Perkins Coie,
Perkins
basically the
Coie, the law
DNC.
firm.
Sorry, is
Perkins
Perkins
Coie.
Coie's?
Yeah, it's Perkins
Oh,
Coie.
Coie, is that how you say it?
Coie. Perkins
Coie,
Coie. Yeah,
Perkins Coie. Oh, I
I
thought it
know
was
people who
Coie.
used
Okay,
to work there.
okay, yeah. So with Mark Elias, that he's behind it, and I've had a couple people on record, off record, say that the Rona was used to weaken the fraud laws, and like for instance in Wisconsin, I think it is that because of confinement, obviously because of the coronavirus, that you don't have to show voter ID,
Mm.
like things like that. So I'm assuming you weren't aware of all these lawsuits,
No, no, I wasn't aware of all the lawsuits, and I think that what it's probably going to turn on in every case will be whether rules were issued properly or if they were issued inconsistent with what state law provides. I know that was certainly part of the Georgia filing that they said a lot of these rules that were adopted, like allowing them to open the ballots 3 weeks early, were the Secretary of State didn't have the authority to adopt those rules, and they're inconsistent with state law. And in that instance, I think it would be difficult for a judge to agree that the Secretary of State acted legally if he acted outside of his authority, in which case state law would trump.
okay, yeah, I
That would
agreed.
be
So
my
okay, so do you want to,
yeah.
sure, so do you want to speak about the different
I mean, the
systemic
system, yeah, it's the system issues, and
systems?
yeah, so there are structural issues. So there's a structure of standard practices by which you should be administering an election. Even though the voting equipment might be different and the number of days, before something can happen might be different, there's basic structure, and that structure exists to protect the integrity of the vote. Because that one vote, one voter, or one ballot, one voter rule is, I think, the Constitution. If not explicitly, it's certainly implicit. And one of the structural issues that isn't addressed in either of the cases I've read so far, but I think is important to note, is that this push for uh, more absentee ballots was placed on elections officials at the very last minute.
Mm,
And in Oregon, we practiced dual polling place absentee elections for 20 years. And it was authorized for 2 years and re-examined, authorized for 2 years and re-examined, because there was an awareness that it was complicated. And if you think about the ballot that you get, whether you voted in person or by mail, uh,
mm,
they're complicated. There's a lot of district overlays, and it's just extraordinary. It's it's very detail oriented, very tedious work that demands a high level of integrity. And so when you at the last minute go to a group of people who are accustomed to planning things out and organizing things and tell them at the last minute, we're changing the rules on you,
Mm.
you're asking for chaos,
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt. So, which doesn't excuse the behavior, but again, it's one of those intentional things where policymakers need to think about the administration of what they are demanding instead of just saying do it. So in this case, there were in the Michigan filing, there were 6 specific structural issues that I would note. Um, the first one is just around the observers, and that's all the manner of issues. That there's many different things to do with observers, from locking them out to keeping them far away to intimidating to harassing them. So, but they're related to a refusal to follow the law around allowing observers. And there are some people who respond to my Twitter thread saying, well, having more people in the counting area increases the risk. To which I would say, no, it doesn't. It just doesn't. As long as you follow the law, these laws have been in place for a long time. It's standard practice, no excuse. Um, the second one is they allowed double votes, both at the polling place and the absentee. So that could be through just lack of caring, like not even attempting to reconcile that, or it could be through poor reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
So in Oregon, we typically are less concerned about the number of ballots that are issued because the reconciliation of the poll book to the number of ballots is important. That's where your key accountability lies. So what happened in Pennsylvania, where there were 700,000 extra ballots, if there's no record in the poll book, and by poll book I mean however they affirmed their identity when they walked into the polling place, or the ballot envelope, because the ballot envelope functions as a de facto poll book, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those have to match up. And in what Sidney's case is alleging is that they basically didn't do that and didn't even attempt to do that. Um, signature checking was inadequate, and whether that was they weren't checking them at all, or the readers they were using were set to a very wide range of acceptability. I don't know. There's 2 ways you can mess with that. One is you can not check signatures, or you can run the signatures through the system and make it so generic that I could sign your name and it would say it was you signing your name. Counting without the postmark, because again, that establishes timeliness. Ignoring the ballot secrecy protocols. Uh, that is a structural issue in Michigan. We actually don't use ballot secrecy envelopes in Oregon anymore. But notwithstanding that, in Michigan, it's the law that there's a ballot secrecy envelope, and they weren't following those. And then they were just leaving ballots laying around, unguarded, out of any sort of chain of custody, uninventoried. Those are all system issues. If you just follow the rules and they're not that complicated, then you wouldn't have all these questions that we have. So that's pretty flagrant from my
Mm-hmm.
view. Uh, when
Would you
you
say would you say after you read the Michigan filing that, like, what would be your takeaway? This is like for my print article. What would be, like, in a couple of sentences? What was your
well,
impression?
the takeaway would be that there was a uh, willful ignoring of standard ballot management protocols and voting management protocols uh, in these jurisdictions in Michigan.
I mean, when you hear, I mean, instance called racist, and it's like, ah, yeah, I'm brown, but they called Monica Palmer a racist, which seems to be a go-to, whatever. It's like, oh, you're a racist. But there was clearly bullying on so many levels. That seems to be a theme, whatever state that you're in. All right, so there was a willful
Just
uh,
willfully, they were willful.
ignorant.
They were. I think this is in. Is it Warren County or Wayne County?
Wayne.
Wayne County. Wayne County. There seems to have been. They seem to have been willingly ignoring the uh, the rules around structure, about how you structure the handling of the ballots and the poll books from the moment of their receipt through the counting.
Hmm. I have a question for you that I still haven't gotten an answer. The Trump administration has been trying to halt certification. At the same time, I came across Article 3, I believe, in the Constitution that says in order for it to not be theoretical and for an audit to happen, that it needs to be certified. And I believe it was Trey Trainer of the FEC who said that as well. So I'm confused. It's like, why are you trying to then halt the certification if you need to have the certification to do an audit, but you don't want the certification because we're certifying bullshit? So do you know, as an election professional, what is the proper um, I'm trying to see Article 3. Without a certification, it would be theoretical and it would be dismissed. So you need to certify in order to audit. Do you know anything about
Well,
this?
I know a little bit, and I can
Okay.
hypothesize a little bit. So,
Okay.
so typically you would want to do a recount, which in effect is kind of like a de facto. It's a recounting the process, but it's sort of like an audit in a way before you certify. And I would guess that legally you couldn't really challenge the results of an election until it was certified. So
Okay.
in that case, then if it were certified and you challenged it, then you'd have to order an out. Then you would have to order an audit. So it would be a similar but different process. I think it has more an issue to do with timing, because any elections official who is worth their salt is going to not want to certify results that are going to be overturned, right? They don't ever want to get to that place. So in terms of the whatever the legal definition of audit is in this case, I don't really know.
Yeah. Um yeah, and also recounting, it's not a problem of like you guys don't know how to count. It's a question of like what are you counting as legitimate.
Yeah,
That has to
you'd have to go back and look at all these other issues, and you'd have to, all those systemic issues and how those were handled, and probably have to, in a recount, you're just recounting the ballots. And I think for example, in Georgia, I think many counties have already done that, but it's the old garbage in, garbage out thing,
right.
right? And so I think in the context of an audit, it would be looking at the entire process from beginning to end. In terms of whether you have to certify or not before you do that, I don't know why an elections official, or if they're not, many elections officials are elected themselves, but in these bigger counties, I think they're probably appointed by the county commission. Probably the county commission could order them to do this if they wanted to, or the Secretary of State probably could order it if they want to. But there wouldn't be any desire by because obviously they're trying to hide what they're doing, so they're not going to be willfully doing this, going back
Sure.
to doing the whole process.
I mean, when you have like this morning was the state hearing in Arizona, and then at the same time they certified the votes as the hearing. It's like it's a big FU, right? It's a big like
Yeah, so in
so
that case, it's really
yeah,
clear that
yeah,
if they go to court,
yeah.
that the remedy is going to happen, likely going to be ordering some activity in terms of an audit of the entire process, not a recount, but probably going back and looking at how did they handle the envelopes, how did, and maybe even, because you're supposed to retain all this, right? You've got to retain all this stuff for 22 months under federal law. So in theory, the court could, if presuming you certify, They go to a judge. The judge says, this looks fraudulent. You need to audit the whole thing. Then you would go through all those steps that I outlined as systemic problems, and you probably want to do it under some sort of supervision before you ever recounted the ballots.
Jeez, we could, I mean, like what are the chances, possibilities of like voting to vote again? Like can you could just like it'd be great to be like this is like scrap this whole thing. And I mean,
Well,
I know
that's a
that there's
legal, yeah, that's a legal question I couldn't answer. But what I
yeah.
would what I would observe is that there is a process, in federal law for what to do if different steps of this process break down. And so I don't see that we would order a new election, nor do I even know who would have the authority to do that.
Okay. So continue. Now we've covered structural,
Yeah, so the
systemic.
third the third area is the technology. And the technology tools are just there to assist. They're tools to use as part of the structure that we just talked about.
Are you talking about Dominion and Seidel? Is that what we're speaking about, technology?
I'm talking about the counting machines that are used in the counting machines and the software that are used in these elections offices, and that is, I think, in this case, Dominion.
Yes.
Uh,
Dominion voting systems, yes.
right, and although I think I saw, I'm not sure if it's Michigan or Arizona where ES&S is also implicated in this, but in any case, the the issue is that there's been a lot of focus on Texas. Texas rejected this, right? Texas rejected it based on functional concerns. So they looked at the function of the software and raised it, which I could go into, but that's not really the important part of this.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
so they had these functional problems. They said it's hundreds of pages to configure it. Even the Dominion employees had trouble configuring the software.
So, sorry. So, Rick, my understanding is they referenced Texas that rejected, I believe it was an upgrade in Dominion, and they said that this, I have the exact wording, but basically that it put there were too many vulnerabilities. It
Right.
was so. I want to just clarify. I think it was an update to the that they rejected.
That could be. I'm not sure. I think I saw somewhere that maybe Dallas County or whatever the county is where Dallas is might have been using it already. I'm not really sure. But even so, even if it were an upgrade, still the same core software code is there, right?
Sure.
So there's these functional problems, both in terms of administrator user experience and voter user experience, and then the security issues they outlined. Okay, what they didn't address was this absence of an audit log, and so I thought that was interesting. So that suggests that they did not actually look at the code. So why wouldn't they look at the code? Well, the reason they wouldn't look at the code, and this is
Yeah.
actually in the first line of that
Yeah.
five-page
Yeah.
in Texas, is the list of the 4 products that they were analyzing and the date that those products had been certified for use in American elections by the NASED/EAC. Okay, so what that is that in 2002, after the Bush-Gore election, and this federal law was put in place, something HAVA is what it stands for. I can't remember what it means, but the acronym is HAVA, I think. They created this commission, and so they put them in charge of certifying equipment to use in American elections. So the
Mm.
certifying authority is this federal agency, and and the NASED. Okay, well, so the NASED is the National Association of State Elections Directors. They're elections professionals, right? So they are going to look at this software and look at the functionality, but not the code. So again, who's looking at the code? That's the EAC, the Elections Administration Commission of the United States. In that process, and you can go on their website, they list recent certification processes, but it only goes back about a year and a half. Um, they outsourced that to an independent provider
Mm.
who's qualified by yet another federal agency. So the elections officials didn't look at the code because it had been certified. Because in the
Mm.
standard on the EAC website lists the standard against which these independent labs have to assess the software product. Several pages talk about the audit trail, and there is no lack of clarity on this point. There
Okay.
should, in order to be certified,
Yeah.
there should be an unalterable audit component to the program. So somewhere along the way here, whether it was in the program when it was certified,
Mm-hmm.
or it wasn't in the program when it was certified and somebody lied about it, there's some culpability there. And so the absence of an audit log, I can almost understand from the elections perspective why they wouldn't notice it, because they were trusting the federal agency. And the federal agency had outsourced the decision to an independent party.
Now, when the Dominion voting system was designed, one of the things that is mentioned in both filings is basically how I say it is it was designed for fraud, that it was asked, can you create a system where you can change the votes, but if you need to do, there's no ability to do an audit. Does that make
Right,
sense?
right. So
If I want to just actually, if I can be specific and read that to you. Um, just gonna,
yeah, I probably
sorry,
should have
go
started.
on. I'm
I
gonna look
probably should
for
have
it.
started there, but so as a CIO of a $500 million financial services firm,
Yeah,
the IT department was audited every year,
yeah,
and many people on my Twitter feed have commented that yeah, that's just like it's a no-brainer to not put in an inalterable audit log is
yeah,
a willful, intentional act of
yeah.
malevolence. Okay,
So, okay, this is as a core requirement of the Smartmatic software design was the software's ability to hide its manipulation of votes from any audit. As the whistleblower explains, and this is reference to when it was created in Venezuela, Chavez
right.
was most inconsistent that Smartmatic designed the system in a way that the system could change the vote of each voter without being detected. He wanted the software itself to function in such a manner that if the voter were to place their thumbprint or fingerprint, then the thumbprint would be tied to a record of the voter's name and identity, but that voter would not be tracked to the changed vote. He made it clear that the system would have to be set up to not leave any evidence of the changed vote for a specific voter, and that there would be no evidence to show and nothing to contradict that the name or the fingerprint or thumbprint was going with a changed vote. So basically designed for fraud. So are you saying that typically there is an audit that's conducted? No.
No, what I'm saying is that regardless of whether or not that affidavit were in the filing,
Yeah.
and I think it's an important affidavit, um, but anybody can challenge something like that. I'm sure that the defense will challenge that affidavit. What you cannot challenge,
Yeah.
there is no challenge for, is
Yeah.
there an inalterable audit log or not? And that should be pretty easy. That's it. There either is or there isn't. That's really not something that you can argue about a lot. And it seems as though there isn't. But the product was sold, at least on their website, and in order to be certified by the federal agency, somebody had to say that that existed in there. So there's definitely, and then we've seen some. I've seen some stuff in social media about people with a video, I think, of one of the salespeople in the United States saying that that was a feature of the product.
I
So
think it's Eric Coomer. I think it might
okay,
be Eric Coomer who designed it. The guy who's also basically pledged allegiance towards Antifa and hatred for Orange Man.
Right. Right. So
Uh,
so 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 I would say, and it's funny because I made this assertion in my Twitter thread, and a lot of IT people weighed in and said, yeah, this is a complete no-brainer. This is, whatever other evidence there might be, the absence of this log inarguably proves that they wanted to be able to manipulate the system and not know it. However they were going to do that, whether, all the other things they designed into it in terms of drag and drop and being able to duplicate ballots and, vote them twice and change the algorithms and all those sorts of, like, the fact that there's even an algorithm to manipulate the vote. And I don't know if that's in the
right.
system or if it's managed off site, but nevertheless, the fact that you can manipulate that stuff, it's all evidence. There's an abundance of evidence. And I think that what might have been desired by a dictator who wanted to make sure he got reelected is probably very different from what people in the United States would want, right? We'd want 100% integrity, 100% auditability. It's a trust issue. So the fact that that's how the system is set up, I don't see that there is. You can strip away everything else, and that one fact
Hmm.
alone, to me, proves that the software should not be in use. And it's not like you can just go rewrite the software. And based on what I read in the Texas statement and the Michigan statement, you shouldn't even try, right? It just needs to be, because there's all these other problems. The configuration of it is so confusing that it's not easy to use. It's prone to error. It just needs to be thrown out. And American software engineers using American protocols need to, if we're going to stick with this type of a system, need to be in charge. Uh, and so in addition to log, the other issue is this
Yeah.
USB question. Do you want to say something about the log there before I go on to the USB?
Well, I guess I'm a little confused as to, is there supposed to be an overview log audit done when you say it's not there? No, no one's what's supposed to be there? An overall audit of the
So
entire
so
election, or
what the log does, what a log does,
yeah,
is it records in just like a table, basically. It
yeah.
records every single thing that occurs in the system.
And this is on a state by state. You're saying a log for every state?
No, in each installation of the software, okay,
Okay.
in each installation, which presumably is at the county level, although some of what I read about Dominion suggests there's also some software at the precinct level if you're in a polling place election, but that's kind of a detail that's not so important. The important thing is that each installation of software has a log. To give a really simple example of the audit log, I have an Apple computer, and when something crashes, I get a dialog box pops up and says this particular process has stopped, something's been disrupted. Here's the relevant log entries. Everything your computer's been doing, every process that's been running, every change that's been made. And when you report this mistake or this crash to Apple, do you want to send this log, right? So that type of a log exists. It's just common standard practice. So
Sure.
in the case of these counting machines, these voting machines, it's going to be obviously a lot bigger, right? But it would record every single thing that happens in the system. And so you could go back and go line by line and say, okay, this happened and that happened. And you would see, oh, there was a vote that's manipulated here. Or there was a USB drive stuck into the outlet and some votes were added, right? And it would probably identify the name of that USB drive, right? So you would have the whole picture.
Got it. Yeah.
That's what's missing.
Yeah.
Now, there's a question if a really good forensic analyst, so the idea is with the law is that an average software administrator could go look at it and figure out what was going on. And if they couldn't figure out, then they would go to a forensic person. So essentially, it looks like Sidney has got now one of the best forensic people in the world, who's joined her team, and he's gonna be getting involved now, and
And
that changes
who,
what's
what's his
possible.
name?
Oh, he's got a long name.
Okay,
He
I think I
works.
know who you're. Is it a Middle
It's
Eastern name?
hyphenated
No.
last name. What's that?
Is it Middle Eastern? Sounded
Yeah, it sounds
it's
Pakistani or Indian or something
okay.
like that, and it's hyphenated.
Yeah.
But he's extremely well regarded. Has military intelligence. Well, I don't know military intelligence, but he has intelligence community experience, as well as private sector experience, and people are saying he's kind of the best. So that's probably where this is going to go. So we'll see what that turns out. So so
Okay.
that's
So
wonderful.
where where are we today, November, what is it? November 30th, as far as the possibility of Trump winning per the Constitution. Do you know? Like what's if we were to take a temperature check, which is
So
appropriate?
there are a lot of moving parts. So you'd have to be able to process all the moving parts to make a cognitive decision. But my intuitive insight, along with my guess based on what I've seen in these cases, notwithstanding what the mainstream media is saying,
Right.
would suggest to me that Trump's going to be inaugurated. We don't know exactly the pathway for that. How many cases are going to win? He doesn't have to win all 5 states or all 6 states. And how many of those does he take? How many legislatures have to get involved? Will the Congress end up being involved? And there's many pathways for this, but it's what I would describe. When I used to handicap elections, I had sort of 4 categories, and I would put this in the highest possible category, which is basically it's his to lose at this point. He's already won. He'd have to really screw it up to lose it at this point. And
So
and I just don't see that happening. I
so
just
when
don't.
you say that, I mean, they just certified Arizona. So how does that work when they've just certified another state?
Well, the Arizona legislature has ultimate
Yes.
authority over the selection of the electors, right?
Well, that's
So
great to reiterate that point.
yeah, really great. And there is some question, which I don't know enough to understand, but there's some question about potentially the overlay. Sorry,
It's okay. It's okay. I can hear your doggy.
he's been really patient the whole time. Um, so there's some question as to whether the Second Amendment might have some play at this, and I don't know enough about that. But I've had several people tell me the Second Amendment might come into play. But as the process currently stands, the electors have to be certified by the legislature. So all that has happened is the election results have been certified, but the legislature has to take the result of that certification and send it to they then have to make a decision. Now, state law might bind them to that certification, or state law might not bind them to that certification. It might be an advisory certification. I think that could vary by state. I'm not an expert in that at all, but the key point to understand is that the certification of the election result is one step in a steps before you actually get to a meeting of the Electoral College in January.
So the state legislators have the final say. I mean, that's to me like a takeaway there.
That's as I understand how it works. Yes,
Okay, so yeah, and there
but
are a
but
lot of
but
moving
but to be
parts. Yeah.
clear, there
Yes.
might be, and I don't know how it is. Every state could be different. I don't know. There might be a requirement in Arizona state law
Yeah.
that the legislature makes that decision 100% consistent with the results. I just don't know.
Okay. And now I guess my final question is, I'm assuming you have Democratic friends that you still speak to. What have you had reasonable conversations with let's say Biden supporters? Um,
No, I've stopped and stopped some time ago. But I will share an anecdote, which I
yeah,
think is interesting, which is I was some neighbors down the street who I've known forever were out in their garage one night. So I stopped by and their daughter was there, who I went to high school with. And daughter is a public school teacher, a member of the Oregon Education Association, the union. And dad brings up the voter fraud thing. And the mom and the daughter both go full TDS, you know. And I said, well, look, just from an elections perspective, here's what my observations are. They go full TDS, practically purple in the face. And I said, well, that's interesting, but let's look at this. Doesn't just apply to the presidential election. Let's look at some recent elections in Oregon
yeah,
that have been a little bit suspect. Nobody had any suspicions, but knowing what we know now, looking back, those were kind of strange results. And I observed that. Mother and daughter both stopped talking and went, that's interesting because in one case, complete liberal statewide candidate endorsed by the left 100% in the general election. And the daughter said, I don't know anybody who liked that candidate. And we all kind of wondered, why did that candidate win? So the fact that I was able to take this fraud and put in the context of a recent race in Oregon caused them to all of a sudden go, oh, this might be bigger than the presidency. This might be the integrity of our elections, might be affecting what's happening in our own state right now. And that was the first time I've seen opening, like the doorway started to open. But if you just talk about the presidential election, forget about it.
yeah.
People
It's
don't,
wild.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's wild because again, you're supposed to be democratic, and at least and want voter integrity. That's
right,
part of living in a democracy, right?
right, right.
So what are you doing to further what's I mean, does this take part of how does the election play into your life? Like, would you be continuing to track this? Are you doing interviews on this? How because I believe your voice and whether you want to call yourself a Democrat for Trump is vital.
Yeah, I mean, I'll continue answering questions. And I did an interview earlier today. I'm doing another one. Excuse me, doing another one tomorrow. It's not my objective to be out in the public eye at all. I stepped up only because I was disappointed that nobody with similar experience has spoken up. And and that's just unfortunate. So the extent to which I feel like I can add value from that particular perspective, I certainly will continue to do so. If other people are covering it, I don't necessarily feel the need to. I do have been approached by, in fact, my next meeting is with some folks who have the Georgia voter file and apparently are working with high level people in the RNC who want to talk about how I might be able to help them because they don't necessarily have elections experience. Um, and I'm very willing to do that. I'm not trying to insert myself in anything. If there's people who have more expertise, great. But if there isn't, then how can I not? As a citizen who cares about the republic, how
Yeah.
can I not?
And then what is your prediction? Someone asked me, I was giving a radio interview today, what my prediction is, and maybe I can share that with you once you share
Well,
what you
I suspect that it's going to be there's probably 500 threads at work here, and until we get right to the deadline,
mm.
I don't think it's going to be clear how this is going to unfold.
The
I
deadline of December 14th, which deadline?
I think we can go into January. I
Yes,
mean,
we will go into
yeah,
January.
yeah, I
Yes.
can see them into
But
January. But But I also have complete confidence that because if you look at the preponderance of the evidence, which we don't need to go into, it's beyond even things we've talked about today. The preponderance of the evidence points, the data points I'd look at, all suggest that it'd be very difficult for Donald Trump to lose this election at this point. It's just a
Well,
question of how soon do do the facts in physical reality begin to align in a way that people who currently have their heads in the sand can actually see and say, oh, okay, this is undeniable, right? Sometimes, I don't mean this literally, but sometimes you have to, you kind of have to, this is a terrible visual metaphor, but it's a common phrase. Sometimes you have to hit somebody with a 2x4 before they realize what's really going on. And I think it's going to almost get to that point where the evidence is going to have to be absolutely overwhelming, undeniable, inescapable before the dyed-in-the-wool Biden supporters will see it, because they're programmed.
yeah,
They're programmed, and as soon as you start talking to people about it, they go into this: Trump is bad, and it doesn't matter what else you say, right? It's like somebody's written a
right.
software code and put it in their brains, and it just repeats.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I think that um, civil unrest is in our cards, and that in order for that to happen, you need someone like Trump to continue to be in power. That, and that kind of plays into the fact that I think it's all political theater, and that the people who went to celebrate in the streets when CNN doesn't get to tell you who the president is, it is it's designed for a rude awakening.
Oh yeah,
And I think that it will be there's the lockdowns now, and like you said, there's so many threads going on, but I'm looking at maybe February is when the real chaos, when it is announced that, yes, sorry, you're going to have him for another 4 years. And that's, because it's not the conservatives that are going to go and shoot
right,
shit up, or it's just not, that's not what they do. So yeah, I'm in agreement. It is good, because I think in the when they were celebrating, and I was in a hotel room in Miami, so I was looking at CNN, which is not good for your health. That I was getting into that, like, oh my God, I just cannot see Biden as the president. Now I can't see him going up the stairs in a boot, for they're building a stage or whatever, which is interesting that they're going through the motions, right? It's
right,
like, why are you going through the motions? This is not over until the fat lady sings.
right, right.
So it's
Well,
kind of bizarre, but it makes me think again, this is all political theater.
yeah,
Um, and we're in a reality show. Um, okay, Rick. Well, I will continue to keep in touch with you, and yeah, I'll share my story when it comes up.